This is a demo on how you can use the combination of Biovia Pipeline Pilot and Cortellis APIs to run a particular query and create specialized reports for output. The Clinical Trials Adverse Events Pipeline Pilot Protocol finds a subset of clinical trials, in this case immuno-oncology trials, and extracts those that have adverse events. Through reports showing a series of tables and graphs, this protocol will show what the adverse events are across those trials, what drugs are being used in those trials, and then combine both to show which drugs are giving which adverse events across this trial subset. First, you must log in to Cortellis Labs. Across the top of the web page, you will see the list of the Cortellis APIs. For this demo, we will click on Clinical to load the Clinical API web page. Scroll down to the Demos area, and in the purple bar for the Clinical Trials Adverse Events Pipeline Pilot, click the plus sign. You will now see a screenshot of the Biovia Pipeline Pilot demo, a brief description of the demo, and a listing of the APIs used in the creation of this demo. In this case, the clinical and investigational drugs APIs. From here, click the purple demo button to go to the Biovia web portal login page. This should open up in a new tab or window of your browser. To get the login credentials, go back to the tab or window for Cortellis Labs. Click the Home button in the top left of the screen. On the home page of Cortellis Labs, in the Welcome area, you will see the username and password provided to be used for Biovia Pipeline Pilot's web portal. Copy that login to the portal. For this protocol, in the left-hand section entitled Parameters, you will see the search options provided for this report. You can choose the disease from the drop-down list. For the purposes of this demo, only 4 disease choices are offered. Therefore, we will choose lung cancer. Next, you will see that the query string or call is already provided to be able to run this protocol. This call is basically saying to first connect to the clinical API to look for trials with the chosen disease, and then narrow the results down further for those that have adverse events and that are using an immuno-oncology approach with the drugs that are being used. For this query, we are narrowing down the results to ID 1596, which represents the immunomodulator class of drugs. This ensures we are viewing only the drugs with an immuno-oncology approach being used in the trial. Once you've chosen the disease, click the Submit button to run the report. In the results area of the web page, you will now see the resulting trials displayed in the new tab. Please note, for this demo, only 5 maximum results will be shown. These results come from passing the Get Trial Records operation of the clinical API, using the data from the query string to help narrow down the resulting data. The table displays the first 5 results of trials that meet the expected criteria. It provides the trial ID and title, the identifiers and highest phase, the start date of the trial, the indications and interventions, the sponsor companies and countries involved, as well as the recruitment status. From here, you can select the preferred trial from the table by clicking that particular row. This, in turn, will now open up the clinical trials detailed report in a new tab. This data comes from passing the Get Trial Records operation of the clinical API. At the top of the report is the clinical trial summary section that displays data on that particular trial record, including the data provided on the previous report. This also includes a listing of the associated trial biomarker names, roles, and types, as well as the identifiers and identifier types. Also included in this report is more detailed information from the clinical API, such as the aims and scope of the trial, protocol description, the regimens, the outcomes, the adverse events, contact information, the drugs and regimens interventions, the trial design, the exclusion and exclusion criteria, measured outcomes, and the change history. Next, select the second tab in the results area for more detailed information on the adverse events and on the associated drugs. The graph on the left are based on the clinical trial and the results from the detailed report. They list all of the corresponding adverse events and the percentage of patients across the entire clinical trial that experienced each adverse event. This data comes from passing the Get Trial Records operation of the clinical API. For example, the first graphic is looking for the trial ID of 97306, where the intervention is nivolumab. If you hover over one of the bars in the graph, you will see the adverse event is gastrointestinal disease, and that 38% of patients in trial 97306 experienced gastrointestinal disease as an adverse event. The table to the right shows drugs data from the Investigational Drugs API on the associated drug from the graph on the left. This data includes the drug ID and name, the sponsor company, the target action, the highest phase, and the indications for the associated drug across all phases of development. For the GRIT trial records data, one can retrieve the drug ID. This ID can then be used in passing the Get Drug Records operation of the Investigational Drugs API. Next, select the third tab in the results area for more information on the adverse events on the associated drugs. The first graphic shows data from across all trials for the chosen indication. It lists the various adverse events from the chosen criteria and the frequency of the adverse event across all of the trials for the chosen indication. For example, if you hover over one of the bars in the graph, you will see diarrhea as being shown as an adverse event in 6 different trials for lung cancer. The second graph on this tab displays the frequency of the associated drugs from the trials with the chosen indication. For example, if you hover over the first bar in the graph, you will see that the drug nivolumab is used in 54 of the associated clinical trials for lung cancer. The final graph on this tab takes the top 50 adverse events from the clinical trial data of the chosen indication and then displays each adverse event with each associated drug and the frequency of trials for which the drug is an adverse event. For example, if you hover over the first bar in the graph, you will see that the associated drug, nivolumab, has diarrhea as an adverse event in 3 of the lung cancer clinical trials. This demo is a perfect example of how you can use Biovia Pipeline Pilot to filter the data from one or more Cortellis APIs to help narrow the results of your query. This demo showed how you can find a subset of trials and then pull out adverse event data. From this, you can then look at the individual trials and across all trials in that subset to come up with information about the frequency of adverse events, which type of drugs are used, and which drugs are associated with each adverse event. Pipeline Pilot generates the graphs by pulling the data out of Cortellis APIs and then integrates the content to display it in various charts and graphs.